welcome again to another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. I've been particularly looking forward to this show, and particularly interviewing our guest today, because her work really intrigues me. We've been in contact now, I think, for around about a year, probably more, but we've never spoken before. But because of her background and her interests, I think this could be a really fascinating discussion we're going to have today. So just to tell you a little bit about our guest, Alethea Black was born in Boston and graduated from Harvard in 1991. Her first book, I Knew You'd Be Lovely, Broadway 2011, was chosen for the Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers Program, and her illness memoir, You've Been So Lucky Already, A Little, was reviewed by the New York Times in October. Her father, Fisher Black, co-author of Nobel Prize-winning Black Skulls formula. So she's got a very interesting background. And as I was just explaining before, I was fortunate enough to spend a short period of my life over in Massachusetts, which is her home area. But she's now lucky enough to be living out in California. So without further ado, Alethea, welcome to the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Now you've given me some very precise questions. So what we're going to do here is that I'm going to let you go with the flow. And you've asked for specific questions, and I think for once I'm going to sit in the background and just listen, and I'm really looking forward to this. So the first question is the ultimate question, which I tried to answer in a 380-page book called The Labyrinth of Time.
I love you.
And I found that after 380 pages, I was exactly like St. Augustine, in the sense that was the question of, if somebody asks me what time is and I don't think about it, I know what it is straight away. But when I start to think about it, I get completely lost. And in fact, coming back on the plane today, because we've flown back from Malta this afternoon, and I was reading a book on the physics of time, and it becomes completely and utterly confusing. And then when you start to roll into theology and you start to fall into ideas and everything else and the use of language, it becomes even more confusing. But you've given yourself a really big start here. So the question you want me to ask you is, what is time?
What is time? Well, first of all, please interrupt as you wish. I love your work. I've learned so much from your thinking, your style of thinking, and we could all use your help as we go along. But I came at this from an interesting angle, as you know, because I got sick. And doctors were unable to figure out what was happening. So I wound up looking at physics and the human body together, sort of imagining that our health has as much to do with physics as it does with biology. And I was drawn to your work, actually, by the simple question of, do we see reality as it is? Do we see reality as it is? And I think the answer is a resounding no, as the jaw-dropping work of people like Donald Hoffman and Bo Lotto and Anil Seth and others has demonstrated. But even before I got interested in human perception and cognition, my father liked to emphasize that things are not always as they seem. And before he died of cancer in 1995, he gave me a kaleidoscope to illustrate how just a simple twist of the wrist can change the way everything looks. So I think we should give our wrists a little twist today and say that when we look out at the sky, we're not seeing space, but time. Matter's medium is space, but light's medium is time. So according to this model, light, consciousness, is the a priori fabric of existence. So in the beginning, there is light. In the end, there's light, and in the middle, there's light that's a little dense. And so at the Big Bang, density is highest, gravity is strongest, and time is very slow. Then as the universe expands, density decreases and time speeds back up. So time then is a measure of density. And it was in looking at time as a measure of density that everything opened up for me. So in other words, it requires that we re-examine E equals mc squared. There are two C's, but they're distinct. One is light and the other is time. When time is slow, light is fast, the past. When time is fast, light is slow, the future. Materialism gives the impression of linear progression, but actually everything happens at once. So if everything is happening at once, our bodies need a way to gauge and sync with time, synchronize with time. So I think this takes place with the pineal gland, which affects our core metabolic rate. So if our metabolic rate is too slow, we'll be too dense, and our speed of light will be too fast, Parkinson's. If our core metabolic rate is too fast, we won't be dense enough, and our speed of light will be too slow, ALS. Now, why don't we perceive the perturbed core metabolic rate?
Sorry, I had to go. Somebody's just started mowing the lawn outside. So
oh, no
the
problem.
just started.
Like that. So anyway, so why don't we perceive the perturbed core metabolic rate? Because the pH is inversely deranged, a corrective that masks it. So if my core metabolic rate is too slow, too alkaline, my body is forced to maintain a pH that's too acidic. If my core metabolic rate is too fast, too acidic, my body is forced to maintain a pH that's too alkaline. Now, if I go to the hospital and they test my pH, I'll test about a 7, right? I hope so. If I don't test about a 7, I'm dead. But not all 7s are equal. I can be a 7 that's the result of a 0 and a 14 and be in a great state of health. Or I can be a 7 that's the result of a 6 and an 8 and have lost almost all my homeostatic capacity, meaning I can no longer efficiently regulate blood sugar or blood pressure, etc. And worse, I can't keep pace with time. The universe is accelerating, the metabolic rate increasing and expanding, the pH dilating, and I am left behind. We need to find a way to decouple the core metabolic rate from the pH and measure each individually. So we need to test pH not as a meaningless obligate 7 vertically, but horizontally as a range.
That is fascinating. I never actually thought about it in that way before. That's very intriguing.
It's, you know, this idea that one of the things that I found most interesting is that we kind of live in an upside down world, in that we often see not the derangement, but the derangement's opposite or its antidote. So when we're hyperactive, we don't need to slow down, we need to speed up. We're seeing what the body is doing to compensate for what's wrong. So I think that pH is really central to the problems with keeping pace with time, with aging, with illness. And I'm certain there's a way to decouple those two numbers, because why do we age? Why do we age? We get caught in a metabolic trap. The body wants to increase the core metabolic rate, but the pH won't allow it, right? Because to increase metabolism generates acid. So you need to have enough, the acid alkaline balance, as we've said, has to be 7. So to increase the core metabolic rate, it first senses the pH. So the pH won't allow us to increase the core metabolic rate, and it wants to increase the pH, but the core metabolic rate won't allow it. So in a sense, the hardware and the software are in gridlock. Hardware and the software, if you will. You know, the core metabolic rate is how we're keeping pace with time, and the pH is how we're keeping powers of hydrogen. What is hydrogen? The sun. The pH it tracks with light. Core metabolic rate, time, pH, light, and the two track together.
I see. Because funnily enough, I don't know if you recall, but in my first book, Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die, I had a section, and I think it was possibly Milton Erickson's wife, the famous hypnotist. It might have been him. It may not have been. I'm not quite sure now. So long ago I wrote it. But he noticed something quite fascinating in that his wife was ill, and she was running a very high metabolic rate. She was running a very high temperature. Mm-hmm. And she said, can you go out round to the shops to actually get me some medication because I'm feeling ill? And he went to the shops, and when he came back, she thought he'd been away for hours and hours and hours. Yeah. And he became fascinated by the fact the way her increased metabolic rate was actually slowing down her perception of time. Yes. Now, I think this is where you're coming from this. Could you expand a little bit on this?
Yes, it all ties together. And you have you have many moments in your own podcasts and interviews that left me speechless. And one of them is when you were talking about the nature of consciousness, and you were referencing Diane Hennessy Powell's work and her work with autistic children, where the savantism leans towards prescience, yes, precognition, right? Yeah. And so our experience of time, if our experience of time is tied closely to the core metabolic rate, and if we're looking at the universe not as space but as time, so in other words, in your mind where you have the image of the solar system, put a big X through it, big X through the solar system, and replace it with, if you go to Einstein's theory of special relativity on Wikipedia, right, you'll see an image there. That image is a more accurate depiction of time. And we have one of those right here.
Okay, so for the lay person out there, explain what you're showing here. What is this telling you?
So there are two cones of light, and there's past light, future light, and a hypersurface of the present between them. So one of the things that's interesting about this image, again, on Wikipedia, special relativity, is that the present, the hypersurface of the present, has contact with both past and future. So it suggests that when the present moves, both past and future move with it. And I think that is indeed what happens. That time moves like a tesseract moves. The past speeds up and the future slows down. Okay, so if you've seen a tesseract, and they, again, also on Wikipedia, they have a brilliant visual of a tesseract in motion, where you can see exactly how a tesseract is. I'm sure your listeners know, but it's essentially a cube in four-dimensional space. So time moves like a tesseract of spheres, where so this is going to circle back to what you were saying about the core metabolic rate and her experience of time. If you imagine time move, so a tesseract's motion is a twin-poled motion. It does two things at once. So here, if we're having the past speed up, so this cone narrows, while the future slows down, this cone dilates. So it's a twin-poled motion. One plane starts here and narrows, think of that in your mind, and another plane starts here and dilates. Okay, so that's the baseline motion. Two hands are moving like this. The past is speeding up and the future is slowing down till they get to the end and it flips. That's the tesseract part. Then it begins again. The past is speeding up and the future is slowing down and it flips. So that's the central movement right there. Now, if that's our baseline. Now let's say we have a person who the speed is correct and the differential is correct, but they're shifted to the right. So the past is speeding up and the future is slowing down. But from our perspective, from our hypersurface, the speed of time is too fast and the speed of light is too slow. So let's say we're here. I won't pull the image up again, but let's say we're both at the midpoint of both cones. But this person is shifted to the right. So the past is still speeding up and the future is still slowing down. But for wherever we are, their speed of time is too fast and their speed of light is too slow. That's autism. They're shifted to the right. They're shifted more into the future cone. What if it's the inverse of that? So again, the differential is correct, the speed is correct, but they're shifted to the left. So the time is speeding up and light is slowing down, just as it is for us. But for them, time is too slow and light is too fast. That's chronic fatigue syndrome. If your metabolic rate is too slow, your pH is forced to be too fast. They have to toggle together. We have to keep a pH of 7. So the body gets stuck in this trap where the motion is correct, but the baseline is off. Again, relating to the pineal gland and how it's reading and perceiving time. So with my mother, and I know your mom had Alzheimer's as well, she's similar to your friend that you mentioned, where not only is she unable to form short-term memories, but her experience of time is accelerated. If I leave her in the car and run in to get some dry cleaning, she thinks I was in there for 2 hours.
Wow.
I said, Mom, I was in there for 5 minutes. And also she constantly complains of acid, of feeling too acidic in her stomach. She says, I have acid, I have acid. So what I think is happening with Alzheimer's, again, to go back to this model, because I think this is the truth about the cosmos and the truth about us, because we're part of the cosmos, is that with Alzheimer's, it's as if the right hand is stuck. So the speed of time is increasing, but the speed of light is not decreasing in a commensurate manner. This hand is stuck. So the speed of time keeps going up. It's a unilateral flip, up and up. So while the rest of us keep shifting to a larger sphere of time, right? That's what this motion is. We're actually moving forward. The person with Alzheimer's is staying at the same size of time. So the core metabolic rate is going up, but when we get here to prevent metabolic acidosis, it has to go more acidic. So she's constantly too acidic because she doesn't have this range of alkalinity over here to work with. In effect, her pH range is being halved and then quartered and then an eighth until she keeps getting her circle of time. It doesn't truly get smaller, but it in effect is getting smaller because ours is increasing. The universe is expanding. Our sphere of time, our quantum field, is increasing in size. Hers is staying here. She can't form these memories because her light cycle is a sphere this small. We're out here. She's not encoding out here.
I see. Because this, again, I've just remembered now that the person in question that I was discussing about the metabolic rate was actually Hudson Hoagland. I was trying to recall exactly who that was then. So if that is the case then, so how just to, in layman's terms, layperson's terms, how would you explain precognition then in terms of autistic people and indeed in terms of individuals who have Alzheimer's as well? Because in one of my recent books, I was some extraordinary cases of not just precognition, but almost all-knowing that individuals had. I don't know if you've seen the interview I did with Maggie Latourelle.
No, not yet.
Pardon?
Not yet, but I'm going to look for it.
Maggie Latourelle has been a guest on this show, and Maggie wrote a book called The Gift of Alzheimer's. And what she did was she started to notice that her mother was suffering from Alzheimer's, living up in Scotland. And Maggie used to visit her mother. And I'll give an example of one of the things that Maggie talked about. Now, this is uncanny. This is absolutely uncanny. Maggie was talking to one of her friends. Maggie lives in London. She was talking to one of her friends, and she said, this weekend, I'm going to drive up to Scotland to see my mother. And her friend said, well, whereabouts in Scotland did you live? And she said, we used to live on the west coast outside Glasgow. And Maggie said, well, I'll show you where we live. And she got Google Earth up on her computer, got Google Earth up, and they zoomed in to Maggie's mother's old house. And in the drive of on the Google Earth was Maggie's red Mini car that Maggie had no longer got. So Maggie turns around to her friend and goes, "Oh, that's my old Mini car. Really interesting." Anyway, they then have a cup of tea and Maggie gets in her car, drives up to Scotland to see her mother. She walks into the home where her mother is. As she arrives, her mother's looking out the window. Her mother doesn't turn around, and the first thing her mother says as she's looking out the window is, "Talking about Maggie's Mini. We've been talking about Maggie's Mini." And Maggie said, "How did my mother know what I'd been talking about a few hours before, 200, 300, 350 miles away?"
Right.
And
well,
she then, go on.
Yeah. No, please.
I was going to say, and then she started to keep a journal of her mother's slide into Alzheimer's. And some of the things that happened were uncanny. She was aware of the fact that Maggie was having work done on her teeth. She was feeling her daughter's pain. She then had visitations from her daughter who had died a few years before. And then she said these really curious statements whereby she said, "They're working on the 4 parts of my brain to bring them together." Now, again, the book in question is called The Gift of Alzheimer's by a lady called Maggie Latterell. But check it out. It's really quite fascinating. You find it intriguing. So what's your take on that? What do you think is happening there?
Well, all of these topics, precognition, fate, destiny, are fascinating, utterly fascinating, and they can all be explained if you start to think of time as everything happening at once. Now, part of our difficulty with that paradigm is that we're very attached to our little I identity. So Antony and Alethea in this moment. But let's say that there's other versions of ourselves in all the other moments. So it's the idea of eternal return, which you talk about in your book, The Labyrinth of Time, but with a twist. It's not that we eternally come back and repeat the same life cycle and cycle of humanity, but it's that it itself is on constant repeat, which is challenging to us in a very specific way, because it implies that this is not the only Alethea, that you're not the only Antony, that in effect the Antony of yesterday still exists and the Antony of tomorrow already exists, but you are not he, right? So that kind of fluidity gives much more room for such things as precognition and prescience. And it makes sense, again, if you go to this idea that in the beginning there's light. In the beginning there's light, and the Big Bang is the collapse from the everything being energy collapsing to a single dot of matter. And then time is the movement back from M back to pure E. So we start actually, and you talk about this in your book also, we start at the end. We start at omega. We start at pure E. Alpha is actually after omega. Alpha is pure M. Alpha is pure M. And then time is a matter to energy ratio as alpha becomes omega again, as M becomes E. Because we know that everything is energy. And in a sense, matter is just energy that's very dense. And energy is matter that's not dense at all. So if that is the case, and we start at the end and go to the collapse, and then we move outward towards the end again, then it's not dissimilar from being a writer, where you know the ending. The paths that you take, there are degrees of freedom to get there. The paths, in other words, if I'm writing a story and I know my character's going to go to a wedding in Joshua Tree, she could stop at the Grand Canyon on the way. She could meet a guy and get married and spend 5 years, that's the thing. She's going to a wedding at a specific time. So she can't spend 5 years in Arizona with her new husband. We know the ending, but the degrees of freedom are, so we do have free will, but it's somewhat circumscribed. by the idea of character, by the idea of destiny, by the idea of, not that it can't be overridden, it's the system itself, the whole has an ending that it's moving toward. But we can get there by various paths, and one of the people looking at this is Clee Irwin. They look at these quasi-crystals. And so what is crystal? It's light that's denser than light. So if we start at light and then we collapse into density and then we expand back out, well, in a sense, that light is still there, the echo, the imprint of that light. The paths that we can take to get to that ending are myriad, but they're not infinite. So if our sphere of time is here, we can have a precognition of this sphere of time because it's already happening. And if we're here, so we don't see time that is, we don't see light that is cycling more slowly than we are. When I say we look out at the sky and we see time, not light, but we only see the past. We know this, right? When we see starlight, it's from the past, because we only see light that cycles more quickly than we do. So we see inside our sphere of time. We can't see outside. For light that is cycling more slowly, that appears to us as a black hole. We can see light that's cycling more quickly, but light that is cycling more slowly can see us, but we can't see in that direction. So all of these ideas of precognition, of destiny, of foretelling the future are fascinating to me, really, because, for instance, when Jesus says to Peter, "You'll deny me 3 times before the cock crows." How does he know that? Well, he's all-knowing, sure, but how does it exist as a thing to know already? Unless it is in another sphere already happening.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. The idea, one of the writers that has fascinated me for many years is Philip K. Dick, as you know, and I wrote a book on Philip K. Dick. And he had a concept which is quite similar that you're putting forward here, which he called orthogonal time, which is time at a right angle to the normal flow of time. So it's an orthogonal right angle from time. And from each point in this time, there is an orthogonal time running off it. Now, again, when you were talking there, particularly your analogy about the Tesseract, I was reminded there of the Tesseract sequence in the movie Interstellar. Have you seen that, the movie?
I don't know that sequence.
Oh, right. You might find this quite fascinating, because what they tried to do, it's Christopher Nolan, who's the director of it.
Brilliant.
And what he's trying to do is to get across the idea of the central character looking back on the life of his daughter. And they do it in this incredibly ornate way where they use kind of tesseracts and sort of the way in which, you know, sort of hypercubes and everything else as well. And it's done simply brilliantly, because you see all the alternate paths that could be followed.
Right.
You know, it's exactly what you're saying there. And I think the whole concept of a hypercube is a really interesting way geometrically of getting somebody to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about higher dimensions of space-time.
Right.
I think the Tesseract really gets that idea across. So we've discussed about time and everything else. So how do we age within it then? How I think you've touched upon the fact that Anthony from yesterday is not me, and Anthony tomorrow, we're all actually like cut-throughs of a loaf of bread, and each one is a slice of the loaf of bread. So how do we have the sensation of aging? How do we have the sensation of traveling through time? And indeed, why do we age?
Well, I think that we age because of this gridlock with the core metabolic rate and the pH.
Right.
And that if we can solve that, we could our lifespans could be maybe 10 times what they are now. Because if the universe is expanding and accelerating, we have to track with that. We have to keep pace. We must accelerate and expand. We're not, that's why this, you know, I'm not a physicist, clearly, and I'm not a cosmologist, clearly, but I became interested in this work because this is where the study of health led me. Because we're not separate from the cosmos. Whatever is true for the cosmos, whatever is the nature of time, will have relevance for our bodies and for our health. So, for instance, if time is this movement, this acceleration and expansion, then that is what we must do. We're not raisins. You know, they say, but this came up long ago. They figured out that the universe was accelerating and expanding, and they said, well, what about us? Well, we're like raisins in bread. Right? You heard this analogy where the bread rises and the bread expands, but the raisins essentially stay the same size. Well, this hypothesis upends that. It says, no, this is all one canvas. This world that we perceive is emergent. It emerges from some other reality. In my opinion, the material world is the secondary reality. The world of energy is the more primary reality. But it's all one canvas. It's akin to a simulation in that way, in that sense. And meaning, yeah, there aren't pockets for which the rules don't apply, a pocket of raisin. It's all one canvas, and we can see this in the work of Van Gogh. If you go back and look at Van Gogh's paintings, he perceived that it was all one canvas. Sky and tree and earth are of equal density. And in fact, he was experiencing density that was a bit skewed, right? And so he can perceive the density and shows it to us in his work. So if this is all one canvas, if we must keep pace with the universe, whatever the universe is doing, then to fail to keep pace with that is to fall behind time, is to age. So we lose the use of our minerals. Our minerals are present, but they're inert. So my father died of cancer in 95, and even back in 95, on his oncologist prescribed prescription vitamins, it clearly said copper and iron free, right? So we've known for 20 odd years that cancer patients are not metabolizing minerals, specifically iron and copper, properly. Now, when I got sick, I too had high levels of iron, and I have some hereditary hemochromatosis genes. And we found out that my iron storage was very high. I had high levels of copper in my hair. I had HTML analysis. My copper in my hair was nearly off the roof. Why? I believe because I was behind time. So my minerals were in their inert form, their solid stored form. Copper, instead of functioning as electricity, was copper. I was storing it as copper. Iron, instead of facilitating magnetism, was being stored as iron. If I'm not perceiving time properly, it doesn't matter what vitamins I take, I won't use them in the right way. My vitamin D storage was super high, but I had all the symptoms of D deficiency because my body was maintaining a density that was too dense, a time signature that was too dense. I had all these problems with oxalates. What is an oxalate? Well, your listeners will know what an oxalate is if they've suffered with kidney stones. Oxalates are what cause kidney stones, but they cause all kinds of other problems. They're a huge mitochondrial toxin, and they're a crystal that are found in plants that are capable of photosynthesis. So we get them, we can either make them endogenously or get them exogenously from the diet, from grains and greens and lentils and fruits. So I, like a lot of sick people, found that I did much better on a low oxalate diet. My body wasn't able to process oxalate as it should. Why? Because I was already too dense. So when I was taking in crystal that should be light, so they're crystal that's found in plants capable of photosynthesis. So it was influencing my body's perception of density. I was already perceiving time as too dense, give myself a lot of crystal that could be light, and it was increasing my perception of density. Now, they've already shown that oxalate induces breast cancer. If they inject mammalian cells with oxalate, it will trigger cancer. So, in effect, when we fall behind time, we become too dense. When we're too dense, our speed of light is too fast and it runs down more quickly. When we're less dense, our speed of light slows down and our lifespan lengthens, because we are light, right? We're the light of the world. We have a soul, it's light, it endures after us, but it can spin more slowly in this life and prolong our lifespan if we sync with time properly. But the pineal gland itself becomes calcified if we're too dense, and this impairs its function. So it can't secrete what it needs to secrete efficiently. It itself becomes calcified. Its function is diminished. It can't continue to create the dream, create perception, create what we see. It's and they've shown this, that that melatonin acts upon the parathyroids and affects calcium metabolism. Well, if the pineal gland becomes calcified, it can't make DMT the way it should, nor melatonin the way it should. Everything, both sides, its day and night function diminish. So that was another one of your podcasts that my jaw was dropped for, was the Ascension podcast, right? Because what am I describing? This is ascension. This expansion, another way to describe it would be ascension. But the ascension is perpetual and continuous, and it's universal. We're all included. You don't have to say a magic phrase. It's time itself is salvific in this model. So in the Ascension podcast, you spoke of a time where strobe lighting, right, created sort of an out-of-body experience for you. And I was hanging on your every word, because I think that what the strobe effect does is it mimics a rapidity of diurnal rhythm.
Wow.
So
that's a good point. That's a really good point. Please continue, but that is an excellent point.
Thank you. So we're perceiving time, but that is a perception of time that's very fast. That's the future. So that's at a much larger sphere. So, right, you talk about being, well, maybe you could tell your listeners a little bit about that, about being way out here. And because the strobe was mimicking fast day and night very fast. And what does strobe also sometimes do? Causes seizures, which many in the autism community think are the body's attempt to generate acid with lactic, your muscles create lactic acid. Why? As time speeds up, light slows down. As the metabolic rate increases, the pH increases. So if you're perceiving time is out here, your pH is going to be too high. So you're going to need, if you're already not properly calibrated, you're going to need to generate acid to keep yourself at pH 7. So when you had that experience where you were way out here, I think that your pineal gland is functioning well. It was perceiving time as being very rapid, and it was propelling you into a larger quantum sphere.
Well, it's again intriguing what you say there, because what we're talking about here is my experience with what's called the hypnagogic light device, which was invented by two Austrians, one Dirk Prokol and Engelbert Winkler. Now, what I particularly was interested in your points there, was the reason that they devised this particular machine was that Engelbert is a consultant psychologist, and he works with troubled children. And as you probably know, in the Austrian Tyrol, there are high mountains either side, which means effectively for many times of the year, the children in the bottom of the valleys aren't getting natural light very much because of the way the mountains obscure the sun. And he found that in certain times in the winter, he couldn't really get the children, he couldn't lightly hypnotize the children to help them. And he needed to generate something that he could do a facsimile of natural light. And initially, the light device was just for that. So he could take children indoors and put them in natural light, which would then make them more open and conducive to various ways of thinking and everything else which he was doing. And it was only when he then realized that by using stroboscopic effects as well, he could actually elicit much more powerful experiences in the children. Now, when I experienced the Lucia for the first time, which is around about 10 years ago now, that's exactly what happened to me, because I actually felt I was rising outside of my body, that I was being drawn towards a light source, you know, like a near-death experience, the kind of the tunnel effect. And then I found myself floating outside of my body, seemingly a couple of 100 miles above the surface of a planet.
Right.
And I can even visualize it now. It is so powerful what I saw. And indeed, funnily enough, I was only talking about this to a group of people we met in Malta yesterday over lunch, and I was describing this event. And it was absolutely extraordinary. And it's evident that light, you know, light is everything. It is clear. Now, have you had the opportunity to use a Lucia in any time?
No, I never have.
I must try and facilitate that with you. You're over in California.
Sure.
I know the agent over there, and I'm sure I could actually facilitate you to actually use a Lucia device, particularly because now they've just launched a home version, which I tested a month ago at the Breaking Convention at University of Greenwich, and they came over and they brought this new lighter version, and it was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
I would love that. I would love that.
Okay,
Thank you in advance. I would love that. I try to get natural light daily. I try to ground myself, so to be on the earth without shoes. I try to hear sounds of nature, you know, that I think all of the things that connect us with this time signature are very helpful to health. I had a strong benefit from taking iodine. So iodine can help to cleanse the pineal gland. And I had a fabulous response to iodine, and my thyroid function was tested as normal. No problems with the thyroid, but I had incredible clarity of thought. And as you probably know, at the turn of the century in medical school, they had a little jingle that they used to teach the students that was, if you don't know what and you don't know why, give them the K and the I, potassium iodide. And I think that it can have a cleansing effect on the pineal gland, and vitamin K has been so helpful to me, right? Because if this hypothesis is true, then, and we are expanding and accelerating along with the universe, then we have to modulate our density. And choline is something that can help to modulate cellular density because it's a major component of cellular walls. So it helps cells maintain their integrity. They have, you know, that's one of these nootropic supplements where you can take I buy this active form because estrogen activates choline, and I'm in perimenopause, so my estrogen is going down. I have a mother with Alzheimer's, so I want to make sure that I'm still getting the active form of choline, which helps with cognition as well as helping with cellular stability. But K2 helps the body modulate our skeletal density. So, I mean, the K vitamin, which K1 it comes in K1 and K2. So K1 is the kind that helps the blood coagulate, right? And K2 thins the blood, because essentially our blood as well has to be able to contract and expand, just as our skeleton has to be able to grow more dense and expand. So that was a big, I'm interested in trying the light because I've been able to modulate my own metabolic rate and my own health with some outside therapies that I've tried. You know, I think that was the core of the Gerson protocol, where with cancer patients, they were using coffee enemas and potassium juices, high potassium juices. So the coffee enema is increasing the core metabolic rate, and then the potassium juices is alkalizing the terrain. Because again, you can't rev the engine unless you have a buffer, unless you have enough alkalinity there. So anyway, what I was saying about Kate, grounding, sunlight, iodine has helped me, vitamin K has helped me, and even just baking soda, taking a baking soda bath, right? You've got sodium, which increases acidity, and you've got bicarbonate, which provides alkalinity. So there's been a huge movement with baking soda therapies for many years. And I too found that they help to do this twin-fold motion of the Tesseract, where one thing is increasing and one thing is decreasing, and then they flip at the ecliptic. So when I talk about that, am I speaking metaphorically? By the way, is this just a big metaphor? No, I am speaking literally. So when I say that this should replace your image in your mind of the solar system, what I mean is that now, for the first time in history, we have the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, right? Making 3D mapping the cosmos in 3D. And when we look at what the cosmos looks like, the aggregate images of 1.5 million galaxies provided by Sloan Digital Sky Survey, it actually looks like two cones of light.
Yeah.
And it even looks like the cone on the right is speeding up and the cone on the left is slowing down. But do we have any evidence that at any point past light gets so hot and future light gets so cold that they flip along the ecliptic? So that's the Tesseract move, right? They go along, and then they flip. They go along and flip. So this is what we see, provided by Sloan Digital Sky Survey. But then this is also what we see. This is the cosmic microwave background, right? So if we look at the CMB, the cosmic microwave background, which is in effect the energetic fingerprint of the cosmos, we see a hot side. Well, I can't tell my left and rights from you, but we see a hot side on the left, a cold side on the right, and they flip along the ecliptic. And the pattern repeats, right? So this is the older flip out here. This is it, and these are the newer flips. Now, this image has been called anomalous alignments in our cosmic microwave background. And it's also been called the axis of evil, because it means that if it were salient in any profound way, that we would essentially have to rethink our model of the universe, right? And the other interesting thing, if we see this as a literal image of what is out there, is that the hypersurface of the present, what we call Earth, but what might be more accurately called now, is flat. It's flat for any given observer. So it would appear to curve, it would only appear to curve if our sight line began to encompass more than one as we entered the future. As we entered the future, and there were more than one hypersurface, it would appear to curve, because we would be observing the curvature of time. The curvature of time is not a globe, it's a spiral. Because by the time we get back around, it's the same place but a different day. So that's why our calendars don't work. We need leap years and everything to make our calendars work, because it's not a globe. We're taking this, you know it by now. We're taking something that's flat, we're perceiving its curvature, We're assuming it's a sphere, but it's a spiral.
Do you know, this is sending shivers up my spine, what you're talking about now, because 3 or 4 days ago, I was at one of the really ancient sites on Malta. And one of the things that I'm really intrigued at the moment is labyrinths and spirals. And if anybody looks on my Instagram page, I actually posted a series of images from these carvings of this ancient civilization that nobody knows who they were, but they were preoccupied with spirals. And the idea of the spiral of time and the way in which time spirals out, and we perceive it as a circularity, but in fact it's not a circle at all, it's a spiral. And you just talking about then, I was just going, gee, this is again the way in which there are literally wheels within wheels in the kind of work we're doing and the work we're all working on. But that's incredibly intriguing. Now, one of the things you were talking about before, have you come across a substance called galantamine at all?
No.
Okay, because there's people I know who are interested in out-of-the-body experiences who actually use this particular substance, and I don't know a great deal about it, but it's just intriguing.
I'm sorry, I've also never tried DMT.
Right.
But I'd be interested in your thoughts on that also.
Yeah, because I've never tried DMT either. I tend to always use the reports of the psychonauts who actually do the traveling for me. But effectively, your interesting points there about the ossification of the pineal gland, the way in which the pineal gland seems to synthesize from melatonin, something that a previous guest on this show calls it metatonin, which is endogenous DMT. Again, a guy called Beach Barrett, we interviewed him around about 18 months ago, and he's a very interesting guy. He's actually worked with Mick Strassman in the past in terms of DMT and everything else as well. So in terms of it's absolutely amazing. We've absolutely gone through the timing really quickly. I'm amazed that we've only gone through the hour already. One of the messages you sent me, and you were asking a question about, and you said about the role of dark matter and dark energy in all of this. So where does this fit in?
Well, if matter and energy are one, if they're one thing, and there are laws of conservation of each, then we can never really make anything. If we're just drawing back the sling. So if we make matter in this dimension, we're making dark energy to the right of time. And if we make energy in this dimension, we're making dark matter to the left of time. They're all one thing. They co-convert. E equals mc squared. Energy and matter are equivalent. We can't, as soon as we make one, we're making the negative, the dark of the other, right? And so if this is true, and we're seeing not space but time, that ball of light that we're spiraling away from, that's not the sun. That's the center of mass. That's the past. That's the Big Bang. Or that's 70 years of the past anyway. So I think that every 70 years, this thing flips for 7 years along the ecliptic and time renews itself. That's the past, and the ball of light that we're spiraling toward, that's not the moon, that's the future.
Woo! Oh my God, you're blowing my mind right now.
Come on, join in now for the last few minutes, dear. What's your thoughts on all this?
What she's saying, because, you know, I'm an astrologer and a medium, so, you know, what you're saying is on point. It's, you know, I talk about the ecliptic in Cancer and Capricorn. Capricorn is the past. Cancer is where we need to be going. It's fate and destiny. And then, you know, when you were talking about the heat, you know, in mediumship, depending upon what is coming down on planet Earth, the medium will feel cold or they will feel heat. I feel that all the time. So I'm like trying to bite my tongue, but I couldn't help it. I just blurted it out. You're blowing.
I love it. Should have come in earlier.
We're always trying to get Dia more involved in this, and she
come
always
on in.
exactly.
Come on in.
Well, going back to the ancients, you're also talking about the Fibonacci sequence. It's, you know what I'm saying? It's right in front of our face. So thank you. You guys are blowing my mind. Continue. I'm sorry, I just couldn't hold it anymore.
I love it. Come on in. So if that is the future, meaning that's the past, so we see light that is spinning more quickly than we are. That's the future. That's the intersection of our time's arrow with the sphere of timelessness. So what do I mean by that? Well, there's not one world, there's many. Each of these arrows, and this is the line of time that's perpendicular that Anthony, that you were talking about from Philip K. Dick.
Orthogonal time, yeah.
Orthogonal. So we perceive time as the spiral, right? This is the spiral. So this is the galaxy. But actually, as this spins, what is it doing? It's generating energy. This axis here is the real. So we're seeing the past, but the sun, but the real sun is out here. We're just seeing a pale reflection of the sun. There are many of these times arrows, each vector coming out from the Big Bang is one of time's arrows, is a universe. There's not one world, there's many. In our Father's house are many rooms. So these are all arrows of time. We just see the spiral, but actually it's generating real energy, time itself at its center, a quasar, but time, which is, so we can be doing this, you know, flipping with the Tesseract, or we can sort of, I guess the phrase that they use sometimes, which during the eclipse, when these spheres are lined up, there's another vector created here, right? That's when the past and the future, that's when our time's arrow, we're within time's arrow right now. So when you see the northern lights and all of that sense of vertical light, it's because we're in that vector of time that's perpendicular to the left, right? That's where we're really headed. So when past and future line up, time and light, sun and moon and eclipse, and there's that black sun imagery is sort of that's when our time's arrow is in alignment with itself and we're sort of headed straight. So I found a lot of people who were very fascinated with the black sun and eclipses and with what's happening then. And I think that time is renewing itself. You know, after it, that's the flip. It flips at the ecliptic. So here, this is not, you know, an artist's drawing. This is what we really perceive in the cosmic microwave background. There's a flip that's happening. So that, and it happens at the ecliptic. So time is speeding up, light is slowing down, and right here, at this moment, when sun and moon are aligned, is where it changes, and that change is a beautiful thing. I find that the quality of light, the speed of time are different after those major eclipses, and it's changed. The quality of the sunlight, the speed at which I'm cycling time. Of course, under this model, it would be changing daily, hourly, minutely. But I find there's like a jump after an eclipse.
Well. To hear Anthony Peake be quiet, wow.
A lot of talking. Well, so the last thing I'll say is this. Can we only move time? Can we only move forward? Right? Can we only keep pace with time? Because what is energy? Energy is just matter where the arrow of time is facing forward or out. And what is matter? Matter is just energy where the arrow of time is facing backward or in. Can we only move forward? Can we only have the core metabolic rate speed up and the pH increase? No. We can also work time in the reverse. So what happens if we work it in the reverse? Instead of time is speeding up and light is slowing down, time is slowing down and light is speeding up. And time is slowing down and light is speeding up. Well, what happens when we have light speed going up and up inside the same amount of mass? It strains the matter to energy ratio. So if our matter to energy ratio, our ME, is too low or too high for this plane of time, it forces the cell to double or triple or quadruple or divide, right? Now, the ability to cycle time at different speeds within a single organism is maybe our greatest gift. It's creation. It's how we continue life on this plane. It's how we create. It allows for embryogenesis. It allows for cell cleavage and blastulation. But there's a flip side to the coin, and that is oncogenesis and pathogenesis. When cells perceive altered density, it changes the rate at which they cycle time. It looks to us as if in the case of cancer, that they're replicating too quickly or that the pathogens are over-replicating. But this is a misperception. Because of their increased perception of density, they're cycling time more slowly, causing their light to cycle more quickly. So cancerous cells are working time in the reverse. Instead of speeding up and slowing down, instead of increasing the metabolic rate and increasing the pH, they're slowing down and speeding up. They're decreasing the metabolic rate and decreasing the pH. Instead of growing out along with the expanding universe, they're growing in.
Incredible. Speechless. I'm quite speechless at the moment. How can people contact you? Alethea, how can people contact you? Can you tell us a little about how people can know more about your work?
Sure. All of these ideas are expanded upon in an article called The Physics of Consciousness and Its Implications for Human Health, which is located at welcometoheaven.com. The New York Times quotes from that article and links to it in its review of my illness memoir, which I was amazed that they would do that because these ideas are not mainstream at the moment. I'm also at AletheaBlack.com. That's my author website. And I joined Instagram. I'm going to look at your Instagram feed since I want to see what you said about the Malta spirals. So I joined it a couple months ago, but I haven't really started swimming.
I'm still getting a handle on it. It seems that Instagram seems to be a lot of people taking photographs of their food and things, it's quite strange and it's quite different. Really. I need to get with the Instagram program.
I need to get with the Twitter program. I'm on Facebook sometimes, but I'm at AletheaBlack.com, and Welcome to Heaven is where you can read all of these ideas in greater detail. And if anyone has any criticism, corrections, or feedback, I would love it. After my dad published his formula, he always solicited people's corrections, and then even later published articles such as the holes in Black Scholes. So his formula was called the Black Scholes formula, and then he published the holes in Black Scholes because he wanted to know. Interestingly, it has black and hole in it. I just realized now. He wanted to know where he was wrong, right? So this is a hypothesis. We don't know what merit, if any, it holds. And this isn't just me. I've been studying your work for years, and the work of all of these citizen scientists who are trying to figure out the human body. They're out there in the trenches. The parents of kids with autism, people with myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, are just the amount of collective brain power that humankind is turning towards these topics right now is immense. And it's because of that collective power that I think we're going to solve it, because information is so democratized now. right? And it's not, you know, it's like a chorus of voices. It's not the power of one anymore. We're joint. We can expand. We can become a collective because of the internet. We can really become a collective, and the power of the collective is we're going to solve this thing. We haven't solved it. We don't know the core etiology of almost any of our illnesses.
Yeah.
Right? But we're going to get there. We're going to do it.
As a final,
it's been so helpful to me.
And as a final point, can you tell very quickly about your novels, just so if anybody wanted to read any of your novels and things as well?
Sure. Well, first of all, people should turn to my literary writing for this type of thing because it's not there. My editor made sure of that. In the illness memoir, it's a narrative about my life. So it starts in high school and my relationship with my father and his death. And my misadventures as a 20-something, and it's sort of the story of somebody trying to find her voice and find her way in this world. And the other book is a collection of short stories called I Knew You'd Be Lovely, and that my style is realism, contemporary. You know, there's no talking cats, not 18th century China. It's for the most part stories of, you know, if you and I went to a dinner party together and there was some fantastic conversation and shenanigans, that would be a great story in my book. So those are the two books. And I'm working on a novel called Tips from the Afterlife.
Wow, okay. And of course, the thing is as well that any Greek speakers out there will know that the word Alethea means truth. And I think you've been incredibly truthful and brought out some fascinating ideas. My head is quite spinning at the moment. And I know from Dia's whoops of interest in the background over there in Denver, she clearly is the same feeling as well. Alethea, it has been an absolute delight talking to you. Really, really wonderful. I've learned a great deal. And I've got a lot to think about as well, which is really great. And I personally will be really going back into your work in greater detail as well, because I think you describe incredibly complex ideas in an incredibly understandable way as well. And I congratulate you on that as well. You know, you're very much a teacher, which I think is very important. And we all need people like you to be pushing the envelope of where we as humanity are going in the future, and people like you are very important.
I try to keep it simple. I have to keep it simple for my own sake because I understand it in very simple terms myself, and intuitive terms and logical terms, right? So sometimes when I read in-depth articles, as I sometimes do about cellular chemistry, my brain scrambles. Or about, you know, complex physics, my brain scrambles. If it's intuitive and logical and a sixth grader could follow it, I'm all in. So I think that's why I explain things in a simple manner, because I need to understand them in a simple manner myself.
But this is it, you know, how you get ideas across is that way, by being obscure. I mean, recently I was trying to read some Wittgenstein, and my God, that man really, he's like Heidegger, you know. You want to put ideas across simply, they don't, you know, they fail totally, but their ideas are incredibly important, but you've got to spend an awful lot of time digging before you can understand and appreciate what they're talking about. Okay, well, thank you again. This will be up, I would think, within about a week's time, something like that. And just thank you for being a fantastic guest. Please, and I know we'll stay in touch, and check out the spirals on Instagram. On Instagram, you'll find me. I'm as Cheating the Ferryman 54, but you'd also find me by just going on Anthony Peake as well. But as I say, I'm fumbling around on Instagram at the moment. I'm not too sure about it as a medium.
We're all fumbling around.
That's what we do. We're fumbling around in the dark, trying to find a black cat that isn't there, as somebody once famously said. All right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.
Bye. Bye.